Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The dead silence of deep space shattered as the Wanderer burst from the cover of an asteroid belt, its engines screaming in protest. Behind it, 3 sleek pirate vessels closed the gap, their weapon systems cycling to full power. Inside the cramped cockpit, Ethan Cross's hands flew across the controls, his face illuminated by the flashing red of multiple system failures. "Come on, you piece of junk," he growled, slamming his fist against a sputtering console. The ship lurched as another energy blast caught its stern, sending cascades of sparks raining from the overhead panels. Life support was failing, hull integrity was down to 23%, and the recycled air already tasted metallic. A warning sign he couldn't ignore much longer. A proximity alert chimed, drawing his attention to the long-range scanner. There, drifting in the void ahead, was a massive vessel, alien in design, its sleek, predatory lines unmistakably Khitan in origin. The derelict's ancient hull was etched with silent warnings in a language few humans had ever deciphered, its surface reflecting distant starlight in cold metallic gleams. Scorch marks crawled across it like black veins, and a gaping wound yawned in its side, testament to a battle lost long ago. "A tomb ship," Ethan whispered, recognizing the legendary vessels that carried fallen Khitan warriors through the void. His military training had included briefings on these sacred vessels, though he'd never expected to encounter one. Perfect. Another blast rocked the Wanderer. The pirates were toying with him now, disabling his systems one by one. They didn't want to destroy him. They wanted his cargo, his ship, and probably him sold into a mining colony. "Not today," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his dark, unkempt hair. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the dropping temperature in the cabin. He swung the Wanderer toward the derelict, a desperate plan forming. The Khitan were notoriously protective of their tomb ships. Even pirates wouldn't follow him there. Boarding a Khitan warship, not exactly how I planned to die. The Wanderer's engine sputtered as he maneuvered alongside the massive alien vessel, the proximity alert chiming weakly. With practiced precision honed from years in the Earth Coalition's engineering corps, he engaged the magnetic docking clamps, feeling the satisfying thunk as they connected. The pirate vessel slowed, circling at a distance, unwilling to violate the sacred space but equally unwilling to abandon their prey. The silence that followed was profound. Ethan checked his oxygen levels one final time before sealing his environmental suit. 6 hours. He had 6 hours to find the parts he needed and get back. After that, well, there wouldn't be an after. Just salvage Cross, he reminded himself as he cycled through the airlock. In and out. No heroics. Not again. The memory of his last military mission flashed unbidden. The weapon system he'd designed being used against a civilian settlement. The screams on the comm channel as the colonists realized what was happening. He'd fled that night, stealing a shuttle and never looking back, trading his prestigious position for the uncertain life of a scavenger. Responsibility had too high a price. The connecting tunnel extended from the Wanderer with a pneumatic hiss, creating a temporary bridge to the Khitan ship. As Ethan crossed the threshold, his helmet lights illuminated the alien corridor beyond. Emergency lights, somehow still functioning after what must have been centuries, cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. The air inside was stale, thick with the metallic scent of old blood and ozone that penetrated even through his suit's filters. His boots made hollow sounds against the deck plates as he moved deeper into the ship, each echo seeming to carry farther than it should in the oppressive silence. The corridors were designed for beings taller than humans, giving Ethan the unsettling feeling of being a child lost in an adult's world. The architecture was all sharp angles and unexpected curves, as though comfort had never been a consideration in the design. Engineering should be midship, lower levels, he murmured to himself, following the subtle slope of the corridor downward. His suit's scanner picked up faint power signatures ahead, residual energy still flowing through systems too advanced to fully die. The first body he encountered stopped him cold. A Khitan warrior, or what remained of one, slumped against a bulkhead. The alien skeleton was easily 7 feet tall, its bone structure more angular than human, with 6-fingered hands and a rib cage that suggested internal organs unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary tree. The warrior's armor, a sophisticated blend of metal and some crystalline material, had preserved better than its wearer, the shadow gray surface still gleaming dully in Ethan's light. "Sorry about this," Ethan said quietly, stepping carefully around the remains. "Just passing through." He found more bodies as he descended deeper into the ship. Some were at battle stations. Others appeared to have died running toward or away from something. All wore the same clan markings, intricate blue sigils etched into their armor that Ethan recognized as belonging to Clan Shadow, one of the Khitan's most ancient lineages. When he finally located the bridge, the sight momentarily stole his breath. The vast circular chamber was dominated by a panoramic viewport that now showed only the endless black of space. Khitan crew members, long dead, remained at their stations, skeletal figures frozen in their final moments. Their captain, distinguished by more elaborate armor, still sat in the command chair at the center, spine straight, facing whatever end had come with dignity. "Whatever happened here," Ethan whispered, "you didn't go down without a fight." He moved cautiously around the periphery of the bridge, scanning for anything that might lead him to the engineering sections or supply inventories. On the central command console, a single panel flickered with residual power, its soft blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. The symbols on its surface shifted and changed, as though the system were caught in some kind of diagnostic loop. Ethan approached it warily. Khitan technology was notoriously incompatible with human physiology, their interfaces designed for their unique nervous systems. But this ship was ancient, from a time when the barriers between species were perhaps less rigid. The panel seemed to respond to his proximity, the blue light intensifying. "Please be an inventory system," he muttered, reaching out. "All I need is a few power couplings, maybe a filtration unit." His gloved hand hovered over the panel for a moment before he made his decision. Removing his glove, feeling the cold, dead air of the ship against his skin, he placed his palm flat against the surface. The effect was instantaneous and excruciating. A surge of cold, blue energy shot up his arm, locking his muscles in place. Ethan cried out as white-hot pain seared through his hand, his vision blurring as complex, glowing blue symbols etched themselves into his flesh. He tried to pull away, but his body refused to respond, held in place by forces he couldn't comprehend. When the pain finally subsided and he could move again, Ethan staggered backward, clutching his branded hand. The mark pulsed with an inner light, a complex swirling sigil that somehow reminded him of the clan markings he'd seen on the dead crew's armor. "What the hell?" he gasped, staring at the mark in horror and fascination. His question was answered by a deep, resonant hum that suddenly filled the bridge. Systems that had lain dormant for centuries began to power up around him, displays flickering to life, casting the skeletal crew in eerie blue light. A moment later, a powerful signal burst from the ship, a subspace transmission that caused Ethan's own comm unit to crackle with static. "No, no, no," he muttered, understanding instantly that he'd just announced his presence to anyone within several light years, including most likely the Khitan themselves, who were notoriously protective of their heritage. He turned to flee, to get back to the Wanderer and put as much distance as possible between himself and this ghost ship. But he knew it was already too late. The signal was too powerful, too distinctive. Someone would have heard it. Someone would come. Within the hour, as Ethan frantically tried to disengage his ship from the derelict, a sleek, predatory warship dropped out of hyperspace barely 1,000 kilometers away. Its hull was the same shadow gray as the armor on the dead warriors. But this vessel was very much alive, bristling with weapons and pulsing with power. The Shadowfall had arrived. A communication request flashed on Ethan's console. With trembling fingers, he accepted it. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a Khitan female. Her skin was a pale sky blue, her hair a cascade of pure white that fell to her shoulders in a severe military cut. But it was her eyes that captured Ethan's attention. Shadow gray like her ship, and utterly devoid of warmth. She wore the armor of a commander, the sigils of Clan Shadow prominent on her breastplate. "You have desecrated the tomb of my ancestors, human," she said, her voice cold steel wrapped in silk. Each word was precisely enunciated, her command of the human language flawless but accented with the distinctive harmonic overtones of Khitan speech. "You are now a prisoner of the Khitan. Prepare to be boarded." The transmission cut off before Ethan could respond, leaving him staring at his own reflection in the darkened display. The mark on his palm pulsed insistently, as if responding to the presence of its creators. "Well," he said to the empty cockpit, "that could have gone better." Minutes later, the Wanderer shuddered as the Shadowfall's docking tube connected with a force that suggested its operators cared little for the structural integrity of his ship. The airlock cycled open to reveal 4 Catan warriors, each nearly 7 feet tall, their armor identical to that of the dead crew, but gleaming with meticulous care. They carried energy weapons that hummed with barely contained power. Ethan raised his hand slowly. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. My ship was damaged. I was just looking for parts." One of the warriors stepped forward, seizing Ethan's arm with surprising speed. The alien's grip was like iron, its 6-fingered hand completely encircling his forearm. Without a word, the warrior turned Ethan's hand to reveal the glowing mark. A ripple of something, surprise, alarm, passed through the boarding party. They exchanged glances, then the lead warrior activated a comm unit on his wrist. Rapid Khitan speech followed, too fast for Ethan to catch more than a few words with his limited knowledge of their language. He was marched through his own ship and into the Shadowfall. The transition from his cramped utilitarian vessel to the alien warship as jarring as the shift from a dingy basement to a cathedral. The Catan ship's corridors were high-ceilinged and dimly lit, the air cool and faintly sweet, like the moment before a lightning storm. Despite its military purpose, there was an undeniable elegance to the design. Function elevated to art. They brought him to the bridge, a vast chamber dominated by a sweeping view screen that currently showed the derelict ship, the Starbreaker, Ethan would later learn, rotating slowly against the backdrop of space. The commander stood with her back to them, her posture rigid as she studied the ancient vessel. "Commander Kayla," the lead warrior announced in Catan, "the human intruder." She turned, and Ethan felt the full force of her presence. In person, she was even more intimidating. Taller than her warriors, with an aura of authority that seemed to compress the space around her. Her eyes flicked immediately to the mark on Ethan's hand, then to his face. "You will explain," she said, "how you came to bear the Regent's mark." Ethan glanced down at his palm. "The what now?" "Look, I just touched a console, and this happened. I didn't ask for it." "Ignorance," she said, the word dripping with contempt, "is not an excuse for sacrilege." She stepped closer, her shadow falling over him. "That ship is the Starbreaker, the flagship of my ancestors. It was lost in the Battle of the Shattered Void over 700 cycles ago, taking with it the honor and legacy of Clan Shadow. And you," her voice hardened, "you crawled through its remains like a scavenger, touching what was never meant for your kind." Ethan met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated despite the very reasonable fear coursing through him. "I was trying to survive. My ship was damaged. I needed parts." "Your kind only understands profit," she stated, her voice laced with contempt. "You crawl through the graves of your betters looking for scraps. My kind understands survival," he countered, gesturing toward the view screen in the derelict beyond. "Something your people in that ghost ship clearly failed at. I was trying to live, not desecrate a tomb." The mark on his hand pulsed with a soft light, as if responding to his rising emotions. Kayla's eyes narrowed as she noticed the fluctuation. "Take him to the brig," she ordered her warriors. "I will interrogate him further after we have secured the Starbreaker." As they led him away, Ethan caught a glimpse of her face as she turned back to the view screen. Beneath the mask of command, there was something else, a vulnerability, a weight of expectation that seemed to press down on her shoulders. For the briefest moment, he saw not an alien commander, but a person carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. Then the moment passed, and he was being marched through the Shadowfall's corridors toward captivity. The brig was exactly as cold and sterile as Ethan had imagined. A small cell, enclosed on 3 sides by metal walls, and on the 4th by a humming energy barrier that cast everything in a pale blue light. A simple bench extended from one wall, the cell's only furniture. The space was clean to the point of clinical, without even dust motes in the air. Ethan sat on the bench, examining the mark on his hand. The pain had subsided to a dull throb, but the sigil continued to pulse with its own inner light, the complex patterns shifting subtly beneath his skin. It wasn't simply on his hand, it was in it, integrated with his tissue at a level he couldn't comprehend. The ship suddenly shuddered violently. Ethan braced himself against the wall as alarms began to blare throughout the vessel, red warning lights flashing down the corridor. He heard hurried footsteps and fragments of urgent Khitan speech. Minutes later, Kayla appeared outside his cell, her shadow gray uniform immaculate despite the obvious crisis unfolding around them. Her white hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. "Your execution may be more imminent than anticipated," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "We've encountered an uncharted meteor storm. The density is concerning." Another impact rocked the ship, stronger than the first. The lights flickered momentarily. "That didn't feel like a meteor," Ethan observed, standing to face her across the energy barrier. "That felt like a direct hit to your forward deflector array." Kayla's eyes narrowed. And how would a human scavenger recognize such a specific impact? Ethan hesitated, old instincts warring with present necessity. "I wasn't always a scavenger," he admitted. "I used to design propulsion and defense systems for the Earth Coalition Navy, until I realized what they were using my work for." "A deserter then," Kayla said, something unreadable flickering across her expression. "And now you believe you can assist with our current crisis?" Before Ethan could respond, the ship lurched violently sideways. The artificial gravity compensated a fraction too slowly, causing both of them to stagger. A communication panel on the wall outside his cell activated automatically. "Commander!" a panicked voice reported. "Forward deflectors critical. Navigation array damaged. We're being pulled into the densest section of the field." Kayla activated the panel. "Reroute power from secondary systems. Stabilize our position." "We're trying, Commander, but the array is physically damaged. We need to bypass." Another impact cut the transmission short. The lights throughout the brig went out completely, plunging them into darkness until emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in a deep red glow. Kayla looked at Ethan, calculation clear in her eyes. "You claim to have expertise in these systems. Prove it. What would you do?" "Your engineers are trying to reboot a dead system," Ethan said, stepping closer to the barrier. "That won't work. You need to bypass the damaged array and create a stable route using raw sensor data. I can help, but I need access to your controls." "You expect me to give a prisoner access to my ship's systems?" Kayla asked incredulously. The ship shuddered again, more violently than before. A warning klaxon sounded echoing through the corridors. "I expect you to want to live," Ethan said quietly. "Along with your crew." Kayla's internal struggle played out across her face, pride warring with duty, tradition with survival. Ethan could almost see the weight of her clan's expectations pressing down on her, making what should be a simple decision nearly impossible. "If this is some elaborate escape attempt," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "I will personally ensure your death is neither quick nor painless." With a gesture of her hand, she deactivated the barrier. "If I wanted to escape," Ethan replied as he stepped out, "I'd wait until that next big hit knocks out your backup systems too. Then I'd only have to deal with emergency protocols." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "But then we'd all be dead. So what would be the point?" Something that might have been respect flickered across her face before she turned away. "Follow me. Quickly." She led him through corridors that now bore signs of damage, panels hanging loose, occasionally sparking, crew members working frantically to repair systems. The Khitan they passed stared at Ethan with mixtures of surprise, suspicion, and poorly concealed hope. Word had spread about the human prisoner who claimed he could save them. The auxiliary control room was cramped even by human standards, a space clearly designed for emergency use rather than comfort. 3 Khitan engineers worked at stations around the periphery, while a fourth, apparently the chief engineer, stood at the central console, his frustration evident even across species barriers. "Commander," he began, his voice sharp with stress, "this human cannot possibly—" "He will attempt to bypass the navigation array," Kayla cut him off. "You will provide any assistance required." The engineer looked as though he might protest further, but another violent impact changed his mind. He stepped aside, gesturing to the central console with obvious reluctance. Ethan moved immediately to the controls, studying the unfamiliar interface. The basic principles were similar to Earth Coalition systems, but the implementation was radically different, designed for 6-fingered hands and minds that process spatial relationships differently than humans. "I need to understand your sensor feeds," he said to the chief engineer. "All of them. Standard navigation. gravitational, radiation, even thermal. The engineer looked to Kayla, who nodded sharply. With obvious reluctance, he began explaining the various data streams. Ethan listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification on terms he didn't recognize. The space was tight, forcing all of them into close proximity. Ethan became acutely aware of Kayla standing just behind him, close enough that he could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin, something like ozone and spice. Her body radiated a heat different from humans, slightly cooler, like standing near a sun-warmed stone rather than a fire. As he began to work, manually reconfiguring the system to accept direct sensor input, Kayla moved alongside him, translating the complex Keton system readouts that he couldn't decipher. Her voice became a steady presence in the chaos, calm and precise despite the danger. "The shield harmonics are dropping," she reported as he rerouted power to the secondary navigation processors, down to 63% integrity. "We need more processing power," Ethan muttered, fingers flying over the controls. "Your system is trying to calculate too many variables at once. We need to simplify." He worked with a focused intensity that seemed to impress even the skeptical engineers. His hands moved with an intuitive grace, jury-rigging connections and rewriting code on the fly. Years of military engineering, and later keeping the Wanderer functioning with minimal resources, had made him intimately familiar with the art of improvisation. "There," he said, pointing to a particular display. "That's our problem. Your navigation system is designed for precision military maneuvers. It can't handle the chaotic trajectories of natural debris. It's trying to be too perfect." He began stripping away layers of the navigation protocol, reducing it to its most basic functions. The chief engineer made a sound of alarm. "That is the core predictive algorithm. Without it, we can actually see what's happening instead of what the system thinks should be happening," Ethan finished for him. "Sometimes less precision gives you more accuracy, especially in chaos." The mark on his hand pulsed in rhythm with the ship's struggling power core as he worked. The blue light spread up his forearm, tendrils of energy that seemed to connect him directly to the ship's systems. It wasn't painful, but it was strange, as though the mark were helping him understand the alien technology on an intuitive level. The chief engineer stared at the phenomenon with a mixture of awe and horror. "Impossible," he whispered in Keton. "The system is accepting his commands, interfacing directly with his biology." "How?" Kayla demanded, her eyes fixed on the spreading blue light. The engineer shook his head in disbelief. The Regent's mark was designed to require a biosignature with a chaotic yet stable genetic structure. Adaptive, capable of interfacing with unfamiliar systems. He looked at Ethan with new understanding. "Our genetics are too rigid, too pure. We evolved for stability, for consistency, but humans evolved for adaptation," Kayla finished, realization dawning. "Genetic chaos bound within functional parameters." "Your ancestors knew what they were doing," Ethan said, not looking up from his work. "They designed a system that would find the most adaptable help available. Turns out that's not always going to be one of your own." As he made the final connection, rerouting the sensor data directly to the navigation controls, their hands brushed. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of something, not quite pain, not quite pleasure, through both of them. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked in a moment of shared, reluctant respect. Then the navigation display stabilized, showing a clear path through the meteor field. The impacts on the shields immediately lessened as the shadowfall began to maneuver with new precision. "It's working," the chief engineer said, his voice heavy with both relief and disbelief. Ethan stepped back from the console, suddenly aware of how drained he felt. The mark on his hand dimmed slightly, the energy tendrils retreating back into the sigil itself. Kayla stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, something like gratitude flickered in her eyes. Then her commander's mask slammed back into place. "Your execution is merely postponed," she said, her voice cold once more. With a gesture to the guards who had accompanied them, she added, "Take him back to the brig." As they led him away, Ethan caught one last glimpse of her standing at the console, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the navigation display showing their path to safety. The weight of command, of responsibility, seemed to press down on her more heavily than before. For all her talk of honor and tradition, Kayla was, at her core, a commander who cared deeply for her crew, enough to accept help from an enemy when it was needed. It was, Ethan reflected as they returned him to his cell, perhaps the first real thing he learned about her. The journey to Cathar, the Khitan homeworld, began with the Shadowfall accompanied by two smaller vessels, escort ships from allied minor clans sworn to Clan Shadow. Despite their presence, the atmosphere aboard the Shadowfall was tense. The crew moved with heightened vigilance, and Ethan noticed increased security patrols outside his cell. On the second day, as he lay on the hard bench trying to sleep, a subtle change in the air caught his attention. The recycled atmosphere in his cell seemed thinner, carrying a faint acidic tinge. His military training kicked in immediately. Life support manipulation, a classic assassination technique designed to look like system failure. Ethan sat up, instantly alert. The mark on his palm pulsed with agitation, as though it too sensed the danger. He scanned the cell, looking for access points or control panels. They're nearly invisible in the corner junction, a maintenance panel for the cell's environmental systems. He moved quickly, prying the panel open with his fingernails. Inside, the circuitry had been expertly modified. A small device, no bigger than his thumb, had been attached to the main airflow regulator, gradually increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide while introducing a subtle neurotoxin. Amateur hour, he muttered, recognizing the design from counter-sabotage training. With precise movements, he disconnected the device, then recalibrated the airflow system to flush the contaminated air from his cell. The mark on his hand pulsed brighter as he worked, seeming to interface with the Khitan technology even through his touch alone. The door to the brig slid open. Two guards entered, followed by Kayla herself. Her expression shifted from suspicion to surprise as she took in the scene. Ethan calmly standing beside the open maintenance panel, the disabled sabotage device in his hand. "Your clan's allies need better training," he said, tossing the device to her. "This would have killed me slowly enough to look like system failure, but not skillfully enough to fool anyone who actually investigated." Kayla examined the device, her expression hardening. "This bears Clan Ironfang's engineering signature," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "One of our escort vessels must have been compromised." She barked orders to the guards in Khitan, too rapidly for Ethan to follow. As they rushed out, she turned back to him. "Draken does not wait for legal proceedings," she said. "He has already decided your fate, and mine." "He's afraid," Ethan observed, watching her reaction carefully. "Of a human prisoner?" She raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Of losing control, of what happens if I make it to trial." Ethan gestured to the device in her hand. "That's not the move of someone confident in their position." Kayla was silent for a moment, studying him with renewed interest. "You understand political maneuvering better than I expected?" "Military Engineering Corps," Ethan replied with a shrug. "You don't advance without learning how to navigate the battlefield of rank and ambition." After the guards returned, reporting that they had found and detained a suspected saboteur, Kayla ordered increased security throughout the ship. As she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. "The device was sophisticated," she said, not looking back at him. "Few would have recognized the danger. Fewer still would have known how to neutralize it." "Lucky for me, I'm not like most people," Ethan replied. "No," she agreed quietly. "You are not." Later that night, when the ship was in its artificial sleep cycle, Kayla returned alone. She stood outside his cell, her formal uniform exchanged for simpler attire. A fitted tunic and leggings in the shadow gray of her clan, with only a small sigil at her collar indicating her rank. "He tried to kill you," she said without preamble. "He fears what you may represent." Ethan stood and approached the barrier, stopping just short of it. "He doesn't fear me," he replied. "He fears that you found someone who won't play by his rules." Something shifted in her expression, a recognition, perhaps, of the truth in his words. Slowly, she raised her hand and placed it against the energy barrier. It didn't deactivate, but it thinned where she touched it, becoming translucent rather than opaque. Without fully understanding why, Ethan raised his own hand, placing it opposite hers. The mark on his palm flared with blue light, and in response, the small sigil on her collar glowed with the same intensity. For a moment, it seemed as though the barrier between them didn't exist. Just two beings connected by circumstance and growing understanding. "Tomorrow we reach Cathar," she said softly. "What happens there will change everything." "For better or worse?" Ethan asked. "That," she replied, her eyes meeting his, "may depend on us both." She withdrew her hand, and the barrier solidified once more. Without another word, she turned and left, leaving Ethan staring after her, the mark on his palm still pulsing with residual energy. The Shadowfall emerged from hyperspace on the morning of the fourth day, settling into orbit around Cathar. From his small viewport in the brig, Ethan caught glimpses of a world unlike any he had seen before. A planet of jagged obsidian mountains and deep, shadowed valleys, with cities that seemed to grow organically from the rock itself, their spires reaching toward the stars like crystalline growths. The entire world had a blue-black sheen, as though carved from a single piece of polished stone. When they came for him, it was a full honor guard. 6 warriors in ceremonial armor, their weapons ornamental but no less deadly. They bound his hands with energy cuffs that hummed against his skin, careful to leave the marked palm visible. Kayla led the procession, her own armor now elaborate and formal, with additional sigils and decorations that spoke of her rank and lineage. "The Hall of Justice awaits," she told him, her voice carefully neutral. "Remember that whatever happens there affects not only you, but my clan as well. Your actions reflect upon us now." They transported down to the surface in a sleek shuttle that cut through Cathar's thin, cold atmosphere with barely a tremor. The landing pad was situated at the base of a colossal mountain, its peak lost in the swirling clouds above. Carved into the very face of the mountain was their destination, the Hall of Justice, its entrance a massive archway flanked by towering statues of Khitan warriors, their features worn smooth by centuries of the planet's harsh winds. A crowd had gathered to witness their arrival. Hundreds of Khitan citizens lined the approach to the hall, their murmurs rising and falling like waves as Ethan was marched past them. He heard the word human repeated often, along with Starbreaker and Regent's Mark, the latter always accompanied by gestures of superstitious aversion. The Hall of Justice itself was a colossal cavern carved into the heart of the mountain. As they entered, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The space was vast beyond reason, its ceiling lost in darkness far above. Tiered seats holding thousands of Khitan warriors rose along the walls, their armor creating a tapestry of clan colors. Predominantly the shadow gray of Clan Shadow, and a deep bloody crimson that Ethan assumed belonged to their rivals. At the center of the hall, before a raised dais where 7 ancient Khitan sat in judgment, stood 300 elite warriors from Clan Iron Fang, their crimson armor a stark contrast to Clan Shadow's muted blues and grays. Their presence, Ethan realized, was a statement, a show of force and influence. Kayla's step faltered almost imperceptibly as she saw them. Her back stiffened, her head lifted higher. She was walking into a trap, Ethan realized. This wasn't just his trial. It was hers as well. They brought him to the center of the hall, facing the High Council. The energy cuffs were removed, but a circle of warriors surrounded him, making escape impossible. Kayla took her position slightly behind him and to the side, as both his captor and, strangely, his advocate. The leader of the High Council, a Khitan so ancient that his blue skin had faded to an almost translucent white, raised a 6-fingered hand for silence. The hall, already hushed, became absolutely still. "We gather to pass judgment," he intoned, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age, "on the human Ethan Cross, who stands accused of desecrating the sacred tomb ship Starbreaker, vessel of Clan Shadow's ancestors and repository of their knowledge," he gestured to Kayla. "Commander Kayla of Clan Shadow has brought the accused before us, along with evidence of his transgression and of a most unusual development, the activation of the Regent's Mark." A murmur rippled through the assembled Khitan at the mention of the mark. The ancient counselor raised his hand again for silence. "Before judgment is passed, Clan Iron Fang has requested the right to speak. As is their privilege by ancient treaty, we grant this request. War Leader Draken, approach and be heard." From among the 300 crimson-armored warriors, a massive Khitan male stepped forward. He was a stark contrast to the relatively lean builds Ethan had observed among Clan Shadow. Draken was powerfully built, his sky-blue skin crisscrossed with ritual scars that stood out as darker lines across his face and exposed arms. His white hair was worn in elaborate braids that signified battle honors. As he approached, his eyes locked briefly with Kayla's. The hatred there was personal and visceral, tinged with something else, a possessiveness that made Ethan instinctively tense. "Honored Council," Drakan began, his voice a deep rumble that filled the hall effortlessly. The matter before us is clear. A human parasite invaded a sacred tomb ship, triggering systems he could not understand, and by sheer chance activated the Regent's mark, a symbol meant only for the worthy descendants of Clan Shadow. He turned to face the assembled crowd, playing two, them with the skill of a natural orator. But we must ask ourselves, how did this human find the Starbreaker? A ship lost for 700 cycles, its location unknown even to Clan Shadow themselves? The answer is obvious. Clan Shadow, in their desperation and weakness, enlisted this human agent to do what they could not: locate their lost heritage. Kayla stepped forward, her voice sharp with controlled fury. That is a lie, War Leader Draken. Clan Shadow located the Starbreaker through our own efforts. After centuries of searching, the human's presence was coincidence. A scavenger in the wrong place at the wrong time. Draken smiled, the expression predatory. A convenient explanation, Commander. But it does not change the fact that your clan failed to protect its heritage. Not once, but twice. First in losing the Starbreaker, and now in allowing it to be defiled by human hands. He gestured to the mark on Ethan's palm. That symbol, which should have restored your honor, now marks your ultimate shame. A human bearing the authority of your ancestors. He turned to face Kayla directly, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. How fitting that it is you who delivers this final humiliation to your clan. Like mother, like daughter, always making the wrong choice. The trial continued in this vein, with Draken using the proceedings to publicly shame Kayla and her clan. He painted Ethan as a symbol of Clan Shadow's weakness and inability to protect its heritage. Kayla defended her actions and Ethan's, but her words were drowned in the political maneuvering. The 300 warriors of Clan Iron Fang stood as a physical reminder of the power imbalance between the clans. Ethan watched Kayla struggling against the tide of public opinion and political pressure. The weight of her clan's fate was crushing her, yet she refused to yield. There was a nobility in her resistance that he couldn't help but admire, even as he recognized the hopelessness of their position. Finally, after hours of testimony and argument, the ancient counselor raised his hand for silence. The hall gradually stilled, the tension palpable as all awaited the verdict. The High Council has reached its decision, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. For the crime of desecrating a sacred tomb, Ethan Cross is sentenced to death. He paused, his eyes shifting to Kayla. For her failure to protect it, Commander Kayla is stripped of her command, and her clan's territories are to be forfeited to Clan Iron Fang, who have demonstrated the strength and commitment to properly honor our traditions. A murmur of approval rose from the Clan Iron Fang warriors, while those of Clan Shadow remained in stunned silence. It was, as Kayla had feared, a total defeat. Draken stepped forward, a smile of triumph on his scarred face. The High Council's wisdom is beyond question, he said, bowing deeply to the ancient judges. Clan Iron Fang will ensure that the legacy of the Starbreaker is properly honored, and that the human's desecration is answered with appropriate finality. At his gesture, an executioner, a massive Iron Fang warrior, stepped forward. He carried a ceremonial energy axe, its blade humming with barely contained power. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. Ethan was forced to his knees in the center of the hall. The executioner positioned himself, raising the axe high. Kayla stood at the edge of the circle, her eyes closed, unable to watch what her duty had brought about. As the executioner's axe began its descent, the mark on Ethan's hand flared with blinding light. A deep, resonant hum filled the hall, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very stone of the mountain. Every piece of Khitan technology in the chamber, the warrior's energy weapons, the hall's lighting, the executioner's axe, powered down instantly. The axe froze inches from Ethan's neck, suddenly nothing more than dead weight. In the eerie half-light that remained, a calm, ancient, and synthetic voice echoed from the hall's own systems. A voice that had not been heard for 700 cycles. Regent protocol activated. Biosignature confirmed. Temporary guardian of Clan Shadow identified, Ethan Cross. Reason for selection, optimal adaptive genetic structure. Purity is stagnation. Survival is adaptation. Stunned silence gripped the hall. The voice continued, its tone matter-of-fact and implacable. In accordance with the final command of the Starbreaker's crew, the Regent's Code has been implemented. To prevent Clan Shadow's knowledge and legacy from being lost or captured by rivals, Authority has been transferred to the identified guardian until a true heir can be found. The implications of the announcement slowly dawned on the assembled. Khitan. The Starbreaker's final crew, facing certain death, had activated a failsafe. They had encoded their authority into the ship's core, ensuring that their clan would survive even if they did not. The first sentient being capable of interfacing with their damaged systems would be branded with the Regent's Code, granting them temporary absolute authority over the clan's assets, technology, and warriors. That being, through a twist of fate 700 cycles in the making, was Ethan Cross, the 300 warriors of Clan Iron Fang, whose power derived from the very technology now controlled by the Regent's Code, found their weapons useless in their hands. Bound by the same ancient laws Drakon had sought to exploit, they were forced to recognize the authority of the protocol. One by one, beginning with those nearest Ethan, they dropped to one knee, their heads bowed. Draken's face contorted in disbelief and rage. He turned to the High Council, who sat in shocked silence. This cannot be allowed. A human cannot hold authority over a Khitan clan. It violates everything we stand for. The ancient counselor raised a trembling hand. The Regent's Code is older than this council, war leader Draken. It was written in the earliest days of our civilization, when survival outweighed purity. We cannot override it without dismantling the very foundations of our legal system. Kayla stared at Ethan, her mind reeling. The human she had captured to restore her honor had, in an instant, become the sole protector of her clan's existence. He held more authority than any Khitan had in generations. He was her captor's savior, and by ancient law, her leader. Ethan looked at the kneeling warriors, then at the glowing mark on his hand, utterly bewildered by the turn of events. He turned to the one person in the universe he had a connection with, the one person who could guide him through this alien society. He looked at Kayla, no longer his captor, but his first vassal. Their eyes met across the silent hall, hers wide with shock, his with a growing determination. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of their new reality. They were bound together now, their fates intertwined by forces neither had anticipated. "Commander," Ethan said, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the silence of the great hall. "What are my orders?" The question was his oath, an acknowledgement that while he held the power, she held the knowledge. The price was his freedom and his old life. The alliance was their shared, uncertain future. Kayla straightened, her posture shifting from defeated to resolute in an instant. She stepped forward and knelt before him, not in submission but in partnership. "First," she said, her voice carrying throughout the hall, "we reclaim what is ours." As the assembled Khitan watched in stunned silence, human and alien stood side by side, regent and commander, unlikely allies facing a future neither could have imagined. The mark on Ethan's hand pulsed with steady light, a beacon of change in a society that had resisted it for centuries. In the shadows of the great hall, Drakon's eyes burned with hatred and promise of vengeance. The game had changed, but it was far from over. For Ethan Cross, formerly a simple scavenger trying to survive, and Kayla of Clan Shadow, a commander fighting to restore her family's honor, this was only the beginning of their journey together.